Morning, everybody. No. Can you hear me okay? If I'm awkward like this. It's good like this? All right. Just going to be up here for 10 minutes talking about the microphone. All right, my name's Pat O'Connor. I am here to introduce Max Randall and his exhibition. First things first, we getting a little feedback there? I'd just like to say a few words about Max's outside reviewer, his evaluator, Char Denord, who is a poet, who is from 2015 to 2019, the Poet Laureate of Vermont. He's also an interviewer. His most recent collection of interviews is called I Would Lie to You If I Could, Interviews with 10 American Poets. And Chard is a teacher, including once being a faculty member here at the Putney School. So Max's exhibition is called Your Story Matters, Putney's Permanent Art Collection. For nearly 2 years, Max has thrown himself into the enormous task of preserving and making accessible, making public our school's history. His exhibition, as you'll see, is an elaboration on that project. Through all of this work that Max has done, he's really created a gift for us all, a chance to know our school better, to understand its significance, and to give us some context for our own work, our own lives here. So I have one request for everybody. When you walk away from this room today, try to notice this place in a new way, in the ways that Max invites us to. Find a work of art that you've walked by 100 times but never really stopped and paid attention to, and take a look at it, appreciate it. Okay, without further ado, here is Max Randall's Your Story Matters.
Good morning. Is it working? Good. My name is Max Randall, and I'm a four-year senior. I am honored and grateful that you are all here today because the first step of caring for an institution is to show up when opportunity arises. Exhibitions happen once a year where we see a slew of seniors engaged in projects that speak to them. Exhibitions are crucial for understanding our community as they give us insight into what is possible at Putney. I want to thank everybody I interviewed for my exhibition. You have all helped me better understand the school throughout time. And this project would not have been possible without the development office. Kalia, Allison, Elizabeth, and Carlotta, you all have been helpful in answering my random questions and helped me fill in gaps in research. And thank you to Melissa for listening to me ramble on about random facts I have learned and helping me understand the history of the Fiber Arts program. I look forward to continue working with you over Project Week as we learn more about Libby Mill's story. Thanks to Lynn, who has helped me look at this project from a more professional lens, understanding the importance of art history, even though I never took her class. And thanks to my advisor, Sarah Wiles, who has encouraged me over the years to pursue big projects and always supported me along the way. And to my two sponsors, Kate Knopp and Pat O'Connor, you two have been the most influential teachers in my time at Putney. You have helped me understand my passion and love for history and storytelling, and I appreciate all you have done for me. I also want to thank my outside evaluator, Char Denord, for being here today. I admire your writing, and I'm excited for your feedback on my exhibition. I've been working with the Library, History, and Development departments for 2 years now to understand, preserve the history of school through an extensive archiving project aimed at building a researchable collection for all to use. I knew that I wanted to continue this project with my exhibition, but I wanted to shift my view and learn about the people whose names I'd seen on paper and heard whisperings of. I want to start with someone else's words, and I want you to really listen to this. Here we are, here in this school, and here in the United States, where so many have the advantage of an education. So many of our young people have the ability to go on to school and then go on to college, go on to postgraduate school. With that advantage comes this great responsibility to other people of mankind to try to solve problems that affect mankind, to try to deal with the great problems of our own country, and to deal with these great problems that affect us all over the globe. That's a quote from Robert F. Kennedy from February 1968, when he addressed the Putney School at a Sunday night meeting as part of his presidential campaign. This was 4 months before he was assassinated. I believe that the first step to solve these problems is to look at the history of who we are. Before I step off this hill and move on to try to solve all of the world's problems, I want to leave you with some context into why Putney matters as an organization. The school has and always will be popping out intellectuals left and right, especially artists. Take Jane Dixon, class of 70, who was part of the leading force to bring digital art to Times Square. Joseph Fichter, class of 71, who has taught the craft of sculpture to many successful protégés. The Putney School offers great promise, but it is up to the people at the school to fulfill that promise. I hope that these few days of exhibitions will help you realize the importance of the school and the limitless possibility of problem solving that is engraved into Putneyites. Now, my interest in understanding Putney School started freshman year when I first picked up a copy of The Putney School, A Progressive Experiment, a thorough narrative about the first 20-ish years or so at the Putney School. Susan McIntosh Lloyd, class of 52, wrote the book in the 80s, and it was a comprehensive history. I was originally interested in why evening arts ran so long, probably because as a freshman, I was taking evening arts for granted and trying to get out of them as much as possible. This book is in the common room of my dorm, and I never fully read it until sophomore year, and that's when I became interested in how the school fit into the context of the rest of the world. And at Putney, I became engrossed in history, as I spent more time on research papers and presentations and took many more history electives. History is relevant for understanding current events, and I believe that history is a privilege we have in our education system. At Putney, our history program is strong, but so is the history of the school. And it's not just the history of the school on the Hill, but what the people of Putney's past have gone on to do. When I approached one of my sponsors, Pat, about my exhibition idea, he told me to think big. I figured out that I wanted to do a project on oral histories of Putney people throughout the years, but I did not have a lens I wanted to focus on. Then Lynn Weinstein, our Courier Gallery curator and former head of the art department, introduced us to the permanent art collection. And then I realized that art is at the intersection of history and culture. It describes the given time, and it harkens back to lessons before. And with this in mind, I started looking closer at the art we have on Putney's campus, noticing how the Robert Rauschenberg chow bags hung in crooked frames above the KDU In and Outdoors, and the terrifying banjo lady in the magazine room. I began to start wondering about the stories behind these works like these, and not just names and dates, but chronicles of care and admiration for these pieces. I originally sought out to interview 3 artists who were all teachers at Putney. Brian Cohen, who hired Eric Aho, who was succeeded by Susan Breary. I also knew I wanted to talk to Joe Fichter, class of 71, who was a student and teacher at Putney. I was interested in Joe because he knew a lot about the permanent art on campus. From my interviews, I was able to synthesize a thesis about the school's connection to art. Art thrives in a society aimed at intentional experiential growth and learning. And what I mean by intentional is that the Putney School is, and very much was, an intentional community aimed at redefining progressive education. Our headstrong founder, Carmelita Chase Hinton, grew up in a family that embraced diversity amongst people. Marnie Rosner, class of 69, Hinton's granddaughter, told me a story about how the Hinton's family would frequently host people traveling across the country in their Omaha house, including Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii. Hinton realized this is because the local hotels would not allow non-white, non-Christian people in their spaces. So from her upbringing, Hinton was comfortable with making relationships with people who were different from her, which leads me to my next topic, differences. One of the most compelling stories I had heard over multiple interviews was the story of Fernando and Stefa Gerasi. Fernando was a Sephardic Jew from Constantinople, and Stefa, his wife, was Ukrainian. Henry Isaacs, class of 69, who has a piece in the foyer of this room, was close to the Gerasis and spent a lot of time with them. I'm going to read an excerpt from my essay on him and the reflections of faculty members he built relationships with. Isaacs was first introduced to the Gerasis through Stefa, his French teacher. Isaacs was not particularly interested in learning a new language, but he loved talking to Stefa, understanding her life, her relationships to Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, 2 well-respected European philosophers who stayed at Putney for a brief time, and how she ended up at Putney. Stefa's life is even featured in a chapter of one of de Beauvoir's books, Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. Isaacs would jump on opportunities to visit the Gerasis' off-campus house, stay for dinner, and live with these parental figures. When Isaacs was with the Gerasis, the line was blurred between personal and school life. Although they were his mentors and teachers, Isaacs learned more from them, from their dinners and small talk. Isaacs dedicated his time to the Gerasis as he realized how valuable the relationship was for him as an aspiring artist. Fernando was a living piece of art history for Isaacs, and for Putney, he helped build up the art program more broadly. Isaacs was one of the only students in the tumultuous 60s who knew it was smart to build relationships with the teachers at Putney, and he did this with not just the Jurassics, but other teachers as well. Take a minute to think about the connections you've made with faculty during your time at Putney. And for more context, Fernando was at the helm of an anarchist brigade in the Spanish Civil War aimed at dismantling Francisco Franco's regime. It is impressive how Henry sought out relationships with faculty who had lived lives before him, and he was able on to carry these stories to his protege, Eric Aho. Henry taught Eric at Mass Art, where he introduced Eric to the Putney School. Eric coined a phrase that perfectly encapsulates the point of art Putney and this whole project, the collective genius. Eric, I'm unsure if you know how much this phrase means to me, but it has been running through my head ever since you said it. I wrote it down in my notebook, underlined it 3 times, and drew a circle around it. I think of it as I explain the school to visitors, friends, and family. To me, the collective genius means old and young working together and learning side by side to create something groundbreaking and innovative. Whether it is a piece of art, a tradition, or just a conversation, the collective genius is subconsciously engraved in the Putney culture. Some examples of the collective genius that Eric explained to me were working with all sorts of different kinds of students in the Noyes dorm common room in the 90s on Eric's art projects. He would encourage students to help him work on his artist projects while they would learn about art and work. The collective genius also manifested itself in Eric's long fall trips, where he and Brian Cohen would lead canoe and painting trips aimed at intertwining art and nature and what it means to be an artist in nature. The idea of a collective genius fits into my project, as our art inventory is a collection of stories from people from Putney's history. I started drawing connections of the people I interviewed and began noticing how connected everyone was. Every single artist I interviewed influenced or was influenced by another. Themes and stories from one interview would come up in other ones, and I began drawing connections into my head. Eric and Henry were not the only student-teacher duo that I interviewed, though, as I sought out to interview 3 generations of sculpture students and teachers. Joseph Victor, class of 71, his student Brian Quarrier, class of 05, and his student Caleb Ross, class of 27. I wanted to stay away as much as possible from interviewing people on campus, but I decided that Caleb and Brian's story was too compelling to ignore, and I'm sure there's many other stories. But from Caleb and Brian, I learned about the importance of trust amongst teachers and students. Both Caleb and Brian built the relationships trusting their teachers, which allowed them to succeed in the studio. When Caleb first came to Putney, he was intimidated by the intense amount of work outside of art classes, but once he found what he was interested in, he spent upwards of 20 hours in the studio. Brian is proud that he was able to dive into this, that he was able to facilitate growth amongst a student and help as he dove deeper into a sculptural universe. You can find both of Brian and Caleb's bird sculptures over by the puddle. And my original goal for this project was to write 4 essays about 4 people, and by the time I got to Joe Victor, I had pretty much already done that. I decided to add parts of his story to my essay about Brian and Caleb, but I was really now moving on to an observation part of the project. Victor was keen on permanent artwork on campus, so I was extremely excited to hear what he had to remember. He told me that in his time at Putney, there were a lot of turnover of art on campus. Things would go up, things would go down, and things would disappear. He remembers the Caldermobile and the Leonard Baskin prints. Joe also emphasized how we now only have one Leonard Baskin print, which is in the faculty room. Joe described another print with a man holding a chicken over his shoulder. So I researched the print and discovered its story. This print is evocative of the Holocaust and concentration camps. A question I still have is how this print went missing and where it was last seen. I'm also curious how Putney is connected to Leonard Baskin, especially because Judaism is a cardinal theme in Baskin's work. Multiple people from the time period recall this print and how it was centrally hung in the KDU. This leads me to my next thread in the story, Judaism. I, as many of you may know, am Jewish. It was easy to ignore the first few coincidences of Judaism coming up in my research, but once it became a pattern, I knew I needed to incorporate it in. I realized that many of the people I interviewed and heard about through my interviews were Jewish in some way or another, and it dawned on me that the Putney School was a refuge for Jewish people, as its ideas aligned with the religious ideas. There were many Jewish students who came from socialist left-leaning families because of the kibbutz-like environment. The Putney School was a natural match for these students who were uncomfortable with boarding at a private school with chapels and religious affiliation. This, and the European influence brought by the faculty, cultivated a community where Jewish people could feel somewhat comfortable. So I adorn a Star of David on my neck, which I sometimes tuck in and out depending on the day, and for my interviews, I made sure to wear shirts I could hide my Star of David on, to observe if religion came up in the conversation naturally. And I only accidentally wore it out once, when I was talking to Sandy Rower, class of 81, who you may all know now. Sandy commented on it. He asked if I was Jewish. I said yes, and then asked him if he was Jewish, and he said no, but proceeded to go on a tangent of stories about the Merkabah and how people use the Merkabah in meditation and spirituality. He shared his experience of meditation and how it helped him gain more hours in the day. He shared his experience and beliefs in otherworldly phenomenon like the Roswell incident, UFOs, and iPhones. And Sandy introduced me to my next line of interest in my topic, beliefs and dedication. He cares about very specific things, and that is one of the reasons he continues to give back to the Putney School. Sandy is the son of Mary Calder Rower, class of 58, who was a longtime member of the Putney School Board of Trustees and a generous donor to the school. Mary came to the Putney School because of her father, Alexander Calder's connection to the Fernando Gerasi, and ever since then, the Calder lineage has been involved in the school. So when Sandy was at Putney a few months ago for Accepted Students Day, I took the opportunity to ask him about his connection to the school and how it fits into the context of the rest of his life. In our conversation, he described the importance of art history and acknowledging and looking at the epistemology of art. At the end of our conversation, he invited me to come visit the Calder Foundation in New York City and tour the archive and office. He also offered me a chunk of time where I could interview him in private rather than our informal conversation under the Welsh flag in the KDU. I knew I had to take the opportunity to talk to him, and so I went to New York, where I visited the Calder Foundation on the 12th floor of a Chelsea high-rise. You may know, Sandy started the foundation at 24 years old with no higher education, just to care for his grandfather's artwork. He noticed reproductions of art being sold, and he knew that they could not let resellers get away with it. And the foundation was special, an array of Calder sculptures from the past. You could get as close as you want to them without being told to step away. I wrote this part of the speech before I knew that our sculpture would be relocated on Friday, but I believe that the sudden change speaks to the importance of our permanent art. I want to welcome you all to Calder Hall, named after the mobile that used to hang over our heads. On Friday morning, after I heard the news, I laid under the mobile as it was seemingly still. This was one of the first times I had not seen the mobile move. The mobile was never in the same position each time I looked at it, and this time it seemed even more special. Once the news broke that the mobile would be relocated, I began to notice as the mobile moving abruptly, more than I'd ever seen it before. It was almost as if the attention given to the mobile activated it. While our Calder sculpture will move on to be exhibited around the world, it will never be forgotten, as it will always be remembered by the winds and sounds of this concert hall, and the smells and the grease of the KDU. Sandy told me that the Calder sculptures are really meant to be looked at in person and as close as possible so that you can truly see them. And it is unfortunate that Putney students are unable to lay under that sculpture anymore and watch it dance in the ether, but I am grateful that we had the opportunity to. Our Calder sculpture came to Putney sometime in 1957, when Calder himself came and installed it in the KDU. In 2004, it was moved to the Courier Center, and Calder was dedicated in the naming of the room we are in now. And now in 2025, we have a beautiful tapestry that will live on in Putney's future, soaking up the acoustics of sing, assembly, and concerts held in here. And it's not just Calder. We have works from Donald Judd, Robert Indiana, Frances Gershwin Godowski, who was George Gershwin's sister. The Putney School is a functional museum of art history. One of my most favorite parts of talking to people was learning about their care for various things. With Sandy, it was intense love for meditation, conspiracies, and art. With Brian Cohen and Sue, it was a lifelong commitment to creating art. And with Henry, it was remembering those who came before him, his parents and his teachers. This project has confirmed my suspicion that our art is recognized and important, and it is something that people care more about than is talked about. And I believe that you all care, because I know you all care, as I hear whisperings of admiration for the Rauschenbergs and the Mitsuru Iri cow drawing outside, which is why I believe that we should continue to notice our art and acknowledge our history at Putney. And it's possible, because Putney is a breeding ground for ideas and ingenuity. It's a living experiment. Our art is here to stay, and it should be admired properly. In the gallery, I have displayed a few pieces of work that you may or may not have seen because they have not been exhibited in a while. Hung from the drawers of the gallery office, 2 prints by Chryssa, a Greek artist who screen-printed depictions of Times Square that somehow ended up at Putney. A large print on the Psalm book created by Charles Knowles, class of '57, in his senior year at Putney, as well as a figure drawing done by Gordon Jones that was found in the stairway of the art building. Framed below, there's a large etching by Brian Cohen and a photograph by David Plowden, class of '52. And while you are looking, make sure to look over at the corner above the cubbies as Avalon Palmer, class of '21's spider scales the walls. You will also be able to see my curated book of art, which includes most of the permanent art on Putney's campus. The book is full of art history, Putney history, and pictures of art on campus. The book is a revamping of Chris Law's 1999 project week sponsored by Brian Cohen. Law's book will also be outside in the gallery. So, while you are enjoying Putney in the final few weeks of this year, make sure to stop and take a look at some of our permanent work. It's no surprise we have all this art, because art thrives in a society aimed at intentional experiential growth and learning. The next step is to begin talking about it, and that dialogue starts now. All right, questions? Sadie.
Are those students looking put up art all the time?
I don't think so, but I can't, I'm unsure.
How has this sort of changed your perception of how you view art, and like, do you have any different experiences, especially as you walk around campus, and what are you looking at and feeling?
Well, I mentioned that I notice when art's more crooked, for sure. And I notice people looking at art a lot more now because I feel like I'm now looking at art. So I had a conversation, was it with Marie a few weeks ago? We were talking about the setup of the KDU and how those pictures, those Rauschenberg prints, are above the in and outdoors. And that's the busiest place on campus, besides from Calder Hall, where people are moving. When is somebody ever going to stand under those pieces of art and look at them? When that's where, you go in of the kitchen, out of the kitchen, you end your line of food. So I've been looking a lot about how art is placed on campus, for sure. That's one thing I've noticed.
Have you thought much about architecture here?
I've had to, because of the Noise dorm, for sure, and Elliott Noise, and how that is a piece of history. And through my research, through this project, not really, but through other projects, yes. And of course, with Lisa's work of looking at the physical plan and understanding how things have been built this way for this reason. If you guys were here for the Skinner or Researcher, we looked at a lot of Lisa's work and did a lot of history about how that building was set up as a different thing before it was a house. So, yeah.
Can you share out loud with the school the correct pronunciation of Maya's last name? Maya Husby?
Oh, all right. So when I interviewed Kaya Husabi in Santa Cruz at her school, the first question I asked her was, "How do you pronounce her last name?" And she said, "Husabi, Husabi." And I'll go back to the slide so you can read it. Husabi. Shoot.
I don't know if you're an artist or not, but if so, has this changed how you make art?
Every Putney person who's done an evening art class is an artist, so I guess we all have to be artists. Yes, I mentioned at the start, I'm working on a project with Melissa next for this project week. I'm going to weave a blanket with historical significance. You'll have to come to that presentation too. Yeah. Kristen.
I'm wondering about the tension between art as commodity, right, and art as something that we live with and enjoy. And one of the things that has come up both with the Calder sculpture, and then obviously you're pointing to these really amazing works on
It's an interesting question because I wasn't really looking at numbers during this project. I wasn't focused on money, and I sort of accidentally ended up Jane Dixon, who I mentioned. I didn't realize how big of a deal she was, and Jane's the one on the left right here. I didn't realize how big of a deal she was. I didn't realize she was in museums. We don't have her art on campus, but I was more looking at the stories behind the artwork, and the money question really isn't much I have done much research into. We have a development office for that, thank God. And I encourage anyone who's curious about art and how it's related to assets, go talk to them. Sarah.
Is there any particular piece that you found on campus that that the story was especially compelling or interesting or fascinating to you?
This is one I've been preparing for, this question, because Sandy Rower, when I interviewed him, and it wasn't just him, a lot of people said this when I asked them, what's your favorite piece? They struggled with this question. And it was like, okay, well, all our art is a collection. It's really hard to single out a favorite piece. So I don't have a favorite piece necessarily, but one that I keep going back to, and a situation that I keep looking at, is how the Robert Rauschenbergs are hung over the KDU in and outdoors, and I think that's really just a surprising place for them to be. I know that we're not going to probably move them, but it's interesting how they're over the busiest place on campus, where people don't really have time to stop and look at them. Robin.
Based on your experience of looking at everything and learning more about it, do you have recommendations for like how we should go about preserving it and making sure that people understand what they're looking at?
Yes, I do have a recommendation, which I wanted to include in my speech, so I'm glad you asked. When I was in New York and I talked to Jane, and she said, go to my museum, go to the museum, go to the Whitney Museum, and go look at my piece. So I looked at her piece, and I turned around, and there was a bench, and I noticed, oh, I can just sit here and look at the piece. So I think sitting down and watching stuff, maybe putting a chair in front of a piece of art, leaning up against the wall behind the piece of art, anything to observe the art. Teachers, if you're in the room, incorporating art into your classes. This is a common theme that that I've talked to with alumni. A lot of art teachers and English teachers used to do exercises, writing or figure drawing exercises with artwork on campus. Todd.
I'm curious about your emotions leaving here, having potentially gotten to a place where you just have more questions. Or are you already ready to dive in the archives of your next amazing institution?
You can say it.
I'm not about to say that.
The question is, how am I going to move on and sort of continue with archiving and history work? Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely moved on from the archive project for this project so that I could get better at interviews and talking to people. I've always considered interviewing as a strong suit, but I really wanted to learn how to really lock in with interviewing. I probably got 25 hours of interview time worth of this project, so I just talked to a lot of people, but a lot of that talking was also listening. So I feel like I have a lot more skills now of understanding how to talk to people who are different than me, and yeah. KK?
What's your favorite thing about hot night?
The woods. Go to Adina's exhibition. Sadie.
The pencil sketches out in the hallway down there by the changing room, where did those come from? Because I've only seen names and dates on the back.
That's the Tim Casper collection. And Tim Casper was a student here. He's class of 62. Unfortunately, I didn't get too much into researching Tim Casper, but the development office knows a lot about him. That's a story that's been definitely documented before, so if you're curious. David.
Do you see yourself going more into art criticism or more writing about art, being that you're reviewing journalism?
That's a good question. I have no idea. Lynn.